sometimes you've got to go through it, Knocking down a door to arrest an armed offender, you can do it in practice all the time. But let me tell you, when you get to do it in real time, saying, when I kick that door in, I might get shot. That's different, right?
Beautiful. I guess, Stephen, please share with the audience and me with a sort of a brief overview. You probably have a long story, but give us a brief overview on your story and what you do, Stephen.
So I'll start from now. I currently work full-time in a bank in risk management, particularly around financial crime. That goes between anti-money laundering and fraud, etc. I'm responsible for a division across the globe, and that's, as you can imagine, that's pretty full on at the moment with the sanctions and so forth, with the conflict in Europe. So where I started from, I dropped out of university. I had a job as a cadet. We used to call it a cadet. Now you'd call it a sort of a graduate program. I was working with AMP in the financial services. And it's funny, I looked at my boss one day and realised that after 30 or 40 years, I'd probably end up in his office. And that wasn't too exciting for me, so I went out and joined the police. And I was in the police for 20 years, and I did things like major task forces, investigations and murder investigations, all sorts of variety. And one of the things I also did was I was part-time in special weapons and operations, so arresting people, escapees and armed offenders and so forth. And I had an incident where we went in early one morning to a place, and I went into a room and I was armed with sawn-off shotgun and some other weaponry. And the person who was in bed reached down and picked up an umbrella. Now, I don't know why the hell he did that, but that was his first instinct. And I knew that my partner was going to come through that door and he was going to see someone pointing something at him. And it was just one of those split seconds. All I could get out was saying no. And luckily he recognised what I was trying to say. And in that one incident, which worked out fine, but I recognised that there's got to be a better way to do this. And just that timing, there was a couple of other police that were thinking in a similar line. So we sort of got together. We got some training from the FBI, and we decided that negotiation should be the primary approach to these type of incidents, rather than using force and entry with being armed. So we set about to change the policy, which we eventually did, and so negotiation became the primary response to barricaded situations. And I then threw myself into becoming and doing the best I possibly could in the negotiation space. And I ended up leading it for the counter-terrorism area for Australia, and being the commander of the negotiators for the New South Wales Police. So I did that until, and I did over 200 incidents where I was either the commander or a negotiator on the negotiation team in a period of 10 years. So I performed at all levels in that role. And of course, I had the background in the operational tactical policing as well. So that gave me a bit of standing, a bit of a reputation with the tactical team, because there's a natural professional jealousy between the negotiators solving things in a very quiet, logical, effective way, and what the media and community like is a swift resolution. And if that involves guns, it's better for the newspapers and other media. And of course, negotiation is takes a long time, and there's no flashy guns or things like that. So it rarely gets the press it deserves, to be honest. Anyway, I'd been through a lot of situations, and a couple of situations I was involved. One, killing his wife and then committing suicide, and another one where someone drank cyanide in front of me during a negotiation. And there was a cumulative effect of me, but I decided to leave the police and do something different. And so I started my own company in risk management and had that for about 5 years before I sold out of it. And I then went full-time at the Commonwealth Bank as a general manager for about 7 years in security. Then I moved to an international role with Marsh McLellan. And then I moved to head of investigation and forensics for Deloitte in Central Europe. I was in charge of the Central Europe area. And after that, I came back to Australia to work for the Australian Crime Commission for 12 months on a specific investigation. And then the CEO of Bank of Queensland asked me to come and join Bank of Queensland and redesign the financial crime compliance areas for that organisation, which I did. And then I moved back to the CBA. I suppose that's it. You know, when you've been working for 45 years or so, it becomes a bit of a story.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I've had quite an unusual story. There's not too many people with my background that has also had, like executive roles in the corporate sector. And, I put down a lot of that to transferable skills. Not so much the tactical skills, although, sometimes you wonder whether you should use them. But definitely the negotiation skills of being able to apply your experience and knowledge to the corporate world. And I think that's one of the things that, transitioning between roles, between organisations, there's only one thing you can take with you. And that is that, the education and experience that you pick up during those roles and how you use that going on.
So I guess, tell me about what's financial crime in banks? Why do banks need someone financial crime? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to say that, but I say that, financial crime is actually the fastest growing area in banking. Now, the reason that is there's new legislation around sanctioned entities, people. It's really grown, and it was really kicked off through the Afghan war, through the other conflicts, but particularly with the Russian-Ukraine incident. So there's new sanctions coming out every day. But financial crime covers all the legislation around anti-money laundering, which has been in place in Australia since 2006, I think it was. So it's been around for a long time, and that includes things like making sure you know your customer absolutely. So you've got to go through that process at least once every 3 to 5 years. It's about monitoring transactions so that transactions aren't being sent to sanctioned countries, which again the sanctions come in. It's about monitoring for fraud and making sure that customers are protected. So there's a lot of online, I'm sure you've and your listeners heard about the online scams and online fraud. So banks have put in layers of security to protect customers, and we're always changing that because the criminals are finding new and very inventive ways of trying to get money out of people. And then you have things like romance crime, where gangs of people are targeting vulnerable people and saying, using of vulnerability in those people's. So it's particularly loneliness, and using that to get people to send money to the wrong place, etc. So there's a lot of people involved in financial crime in every bank, and it's just a part of doing business.
Got it. So the other day I was trying to buy some sort of music tickets to see this artist, and everyone I messaged was like, I only can do bank transfer. Me knowing that if I transfer money and they don't send me the tickets, I won't be able to get my money back. How come, like, is there a solution to that? Why can't you guys sort of be like PayPal, where there's like a dispute resolution process where I can dispute and get the money back? What do you guys work on if you guys can't help customers get their money back?
Well, the first thing is that there's a relationship between ourselves and our customers, but not necessarily a relationship between you and the person you're dealing with. And so you can't step in between a contractual agreement. What the banks are focusing on is the prevention side, through the systems and processes and education and response. And, like I know my team have rung lots of people. We've seen a transaction go to a high risk or red flag area. We jump on the phone straight to the customer and say, this has come up as a problem area for other people. What are you doing it for? How can we help you? Blah, blah, blah. So that getting in on the front foot is the area that we're really focused on. But it's problematic getting in after the event. And you'll see from now on, you'll see lots of things coming up on your banking saying, do you know there's scams happening? Are you sure about sending the money to this area? And it's about that education for the new environment.
Beautiful. And then besides educating your customers, putting up all these warnings, is there anything else that banks are working on?
Well, it's around the systems that we use that do pick up these red flags, and we stop the transaction before it goes through, and we then check with the customer as well. And lots of those, I don't know, like there's hundreds of those transactions every single day, where the algorithms we use are one step ahead of the criminals, but there's the same amount that we're one step behind, and we're learning, and the algorithms are learning as well, because it's an asymmetric war, because we have to plug all the holes. The criminals only have to find one vulnerability, and it's usually on our customer side. So that, for example, they've put out a virus that collects bank account details. That's what the whole purpose of the virus is. Very hard for us to deal with that, because we've got no connectivity in that relationship. But the criminals are sending this virus out. They've only got out of the million they send out, they've only have to one person to click on it to perhaps make $200,000 or $300,000. And so that's the vulnerability.
And then when someone gets your bank details, BSP account number, can they do anything with that? Because they can't really take money out of your account with just those details, correct?
They can, if the algorithm is smart enough. It'll pick up the it's a bit like the predictive text in your banking, where it says put your bank account details, and Microsoft says, I've already know that, so I'm just going to pre-populate it. So the algorithms can pick that pre-population up, which includes the password. So in other words, if you click on a link that's got an attachment to this virus, they know what your computer knows. And that means they can access it like you, and they can transfer money anywhere in the world through, because we can now, we can go transfer money anywhere. And it's very difficult to get back. In fact, I used to be able to get a percentage back, but now it's very difficult with the new regimes around transfers of money, happening in seconds rather than 2 or 3 days.
Most definitely. I learned from another sort of consultant who was talking about, he sort of works in a similar industry, and he was talking about how you should never carry a debit card with you. You should only have credit cards in your wallet. What's your thoughts on that piece of advice?
Well, the piece of advice is probably around the fact that credit cards to a large extent are insured. The bank, if you haven't supplied the password and the credit card, and you haven't shared the credit card with anyone or the password, then it's basically the bank's responsibility to recompense the customer. But if you've just got a debit card, which can be dealt with the same way, it doesn't have the same support for the customer. So it's probably right. Now, I reckon this liability issue is going to change. It's going to end up, the banks are going to start saying, we're taking a big hit on this, and it's can't be absorbed through our business model. So therefore, we're going to change the onus to the customer. I hope it doesn't work that way. I hope that we still, make sure it's in the business case that we're able to deal with customers that have been compromised, because it does provide confidence in our financial system. But how long can you support it?
Now, what's your thoughts on, have you looked into like the blockchain, cryptocurrencies? What's your thoughts on that, where people are able to easily send money back and forth? There's like a transparent ledger of where every single transaction goes. You can link it all back by just following the trail, and it's all transparent. What's your thoughts on the blockchain?
Well, the first thing is I'll point out that blockchain has been stolen, right? Now, if it's been stolen, how can that be if you can trace everything down? It doesn't make sense, right? And the reason it doesn't make sense is because people can still disguise transfers of money, and it's not completely transparent because it's using legacy systems to actually get the money from blockchain into other currencies. So that's the one thing that I'm thinking that, look, I think is exciting. I think things like the ledger, this dispersed ledger system is perfect for things like land titles, right? Diamonds, things like that, where there's an individual, absolutely piece of something which is unique, and to be able to follow that for centuries down the title of that would be fantastic. But I don't think we've got it quite right when we're dealing with currencies, mainly because I think there's 2 countries that have sort of made it legal tender. One's Venezuela, and they're coming to crisis point right now because the drop in Bitcoin is radical across everyday items, and people are going back to old currency to deal with that because it's just too unpredictable. So what it is good at is very good at moving money anywhere in the world quickly. And as you say, identifying the people attached to that isn't transparent. So it's still, law enforcement are probably 10 or 15 years behind it. But having said that, the American Tax Office are accepting Bitcoin. They're certainly seizing Bitcoin in investigations, and so is the FBI, and so is the Australian law enforcement. So that tells me that, they're catching up and they're sort of understanding it a lot better.
Talking about the law enforcement, what's your thoughts on how Australia handled COVID quarantine restrictions? Like, I'm hearing perspectives of people from America, and they're quite shocked about how they see Australia as this communist state that is really restrictive. What's your thoughts being in the police force and being in this country?
Being ex-police.
Yes.
Well, police don't have a lot to do with health, but around enforcing health orders, I think that with hindsight, you would do it a lot differently. But, I was certainly one of, and if you go back to 2022 or whatever it was, when there was the other pandemic, they did exactly the same things. It was about restriction of movement to restrict the virus. There was no way you could just take a pill or have a, look, I've had all my shots, but I still got COVID. I don't know what I would have been like had I not had my shots, but it's about community good in the majority versus some people that don't believe it should be, they should have been restricted or forced to do stuff. And my attitude to that is, I'm supportive of, you should be able to do anything that's not illegal. I don't care what it is. However, laws are in place to be able to support the community, and the community based on the laws of the government at the time. So for me, it's a lot clearer than other people. But, someone asked me, they said, well, I'm not vaccinated against COVID. Do you mind if I come to this meeting? My answer was, I'm not worried about that, right? It's really, all I can say is you come at your own risk. And that's been my attitude, because I want to maintain freedom, freedom of speech and movement and all those sort of things. And if the majority of us can be protected, then the others create their own risk that they accept.
That makes sense. Talking about negotiations, so recently I went to New Caledonia. I was exploring the island. I was trying to meet all the local tribes people, and I found myself in a situation where I was following it and going along with these tribes to their to their place. And luckily they were nice people, but if I followed them maybe half an hour out, and I went into their village and met their people. They all had guns and stuff because they hunt. If I was put in a situation where they were like, hey, like, give us everything, or like they weren't nice people, what would you recommend me to do when it comes to negotiation?
Well, I think all my advice would be useless by this point if you're actually with them.
Yes.
One thing to do is quickly assess what the immediate customs are, and really make sure that you let them know that you're going to follow that custom, whatever it is. I think trying to build a relationship with the the people with the power in that situation would be one of my first priorities, to actually demonstrate that you're open for discussion and that you don't provide any threat to them, that you are a thoughtful person and would just demonstrate respect. Obviously, the advice I would do before you went was, do you need to go? Do you know where you're going? Do you understand the environment in which you'll be talking to other people? Do you know where the power is in respect to the people? What's your escape? What's your plan B? What's your escape route? One of my friends actually did a similar thing in Asia. She was fairly young at the time. She was about 26. she decided to go to the remotest part she possibly could, with her time constraints, and ended up drinking an Asian alcohol beverage, playing a card game that she didn't really understand, but she just wanted to be sociable and so forth. And at the end of a couple of hours, they said to her, "You owe us $10,000. You lost the card game." And she said, "Well, how did I lose the card game?" And they said, "Oh, look, there are your cards, and here's all the points, and you owe us $10,000. And they said, "And you're not leaving here until you pay." And so they took her to a phone where she was able to ring her mother and then arrange over several days to get some money to them, which they then accepted and let her go. And that was a traumatic event for her. She'll never forget it. She was actually on her way to meet me in Prague. And so she was late, and I started to panic about where she was and couldn't get in contact. And it was just a completely sort of I say naive. This girl was worked for one of the big four accounting firms, and she was super smart. But the combination of a little bit of naivety and a lot of this trying to please and not understanding, where she was and what the rules of the game were, she put ourselves in an enormously vulnerable situation. And I'm really surprised she got out of there without being seriously hurt or worse. I expected from my experience that they would have been chopping fingers off and sending them to highlight their need.
Wow.
But it was certainly end up being an expensive story, but a story nevertheless.
Is there like a balance between sort of exploring, taking risks, sort of growing and sort of putting yourself in uncomfortable situations versus just being comfortable, just staying at the main cities, get like a nice 3-star hotel, and just sit by the pool for your holiday?
Yeah, being a person that I started travelling when I was 16. I travelled overseas when I was 16.
Wow.
Only in New Zealand. It was definitely against my parents' wishes, but there was 3 of us decided we were tough guys and we could do it. I had some fantastic experiences, met some wonderful people, had a extraordinarily good time. But I've also worked with the Philippine National Police, and I taught them negotiation actually, but they took me out to some of the areas, the back blocks of the Philippines and, places in Mindanao and so forth. And you're dealing with people with tribal conflict that's been going for centuries. And you've got no idea you're stepping into that, because on the surface, people are carrying mobile phones and they're reasonably well dressed. There's houses and different things, but it's just an ongoing tribal war. And the Philippine Army have been down in that area for 50 or 60 years. And so you've got to do your research where you're going to, and you've got to understand what the risk is and what your risk appetite is. There's plenty of journalists that I've known that have travelled that do most of their work in war zones. But having said that, they've been trained by the various, police and army to be able to survive in those situations. And so it's a different training level than it is to match the risk level. And there's a different personal risk level. So some people are very comfortable in those circumstances. Other people, rather be beside the pool. So I think it's matching, training, education, experience to the risk environment, and making sure that you're doing it for the right reason. Because also it can put other people at risk. You can come across a person, they can offer you, food, drink, accommodation, and it immediately puts them in danger from other people in the same village environment because they see them as siding with potential enemy. And so it changes their risk environment. And not intentionally, but it does.
What type of training do these war zone journalists go through? What type of training are they usually taught? Are they taught a lot of negotiation, survival, like running, like physical training? What type of training is it?
Well, it's more around how to operate, listening to the right people about what are the risk areas, where not to go, where is a safe area, where is it a sort of like a marginal area. And, usually people on the ground with that experience will be able to tell those things. But the training will be on, how to, for example, put on your bulletproof vest properly, how to wear the right, defence, like helmet and so forth, where to go, where not to go, how to negotiate in some respects, how to survive as a hostage, what you can say, do, versus, just being completely, I suppose, naive in the situation. And so it then becomes specific to the education specific to the event. So, you want to know the details of the, what's the conflict all about, who are the players, who aren't the players. There's a lot of complexity. I'm seeing Russia has actually has got 3 foreign fighters, and they're saying because they're foreign fighters, they don't come under the Geneva Convention, so we're going to kill them. That was something that I'd want to know if I was going in there, because if you're a known combatant, you actually come under the Geneva Convention and you get treated differently. I mean, it's only a law, you know what I mean? It's only something that's been agreed. It doesn't mean that's actually going to happen, but at least you've got some understanding of what the potential is.
How many years were you in the police versus how many years have you been in the corporate world, Stephen?
So I was in the police for a bit over 20 years. So I've been in the corporate world longer, so 25, 26 years in the corporate world.
Oh, wow. So it's sort of like 20, 26. Having sort of been deep in both worlds, what has been your biggest takeaways living in both extremes, like complete different spectrums?
I think the takeaway for me is that, there is cross experience that you can take either way. But, life's linear. So I was very young when I was 19 years old when I joined the police. And some of the things I did as a 19, 20-year-old, I look back at, people that I know that are 19 and 20, and I just wonder how I survived, because you just don't have life experiences. I'm sure if I joined the police with the experience I've got now in the corporate world, I'd function a lot better, a lot smarter. And I think that's probably true for everyone, You look back and you say, I'll do things differently, but I think that's around maturity and going through life, to be honest. But one thing I do look back on, and just on that, the age I was making decisions, and I've arrested someone for murder by the time I was 21, something like that. Armed robbers, major drug trafficking, and I sort of was, less than 25 years old, and I'd done all those things. So it was quite a unique experience.
What would you do differently with the new experience you had? If you could go back, your age, would you have maybe delayed and gone into the police force at an older age, or would you have made different decisions, worked in different sectors?
Oh, look, I think that, if I look back in a very, very objective manner, I worked in a very operational area, so you're dealing with, organised crime and very, basically everything was. I was working in a professional area, and the criminals were very professional. Every time you arrested someone, they always made complaints about you. They always tried to set you up. They always tried to, get you off the scene. So any court matter would go a lot smoother for them. They were very good at it. In those days, I accepted it as being part of the game. But I wanted to be Commissioner of Police at one point. I think the first thing you do is, if you want to be Commissioner of Police, is don't be involved in that area of policing. You become too vulnerable as an individual, and nobody really understands the environment. Like, I'm telling you what I experienced, but it's very difficult for other people to understand the environment without having the experience. It's like trying to understand what a surgeon does, and if he or she talks through and says, well, all you do is you do an incision and then do X, Y, and Z. It's very logical, but there's a lot between saying it and doing it.
Most definitely. And given that you've worked in the police force and you know Australia's sort of crime, how safe are we compared to like UK and USA? Like is Australia like this super safe country? Whereas like I'm hearing in UK and London there's stabbings all the time. US, US is a bit crazy right now. Is Australia this amazing safe haven, or is there a lot of things going on behind the scenes?
Look, there's always criminal activity. There's always crime on the basis we're dealing with people. So, until we take people from Mars, you're always going to have the frailties of individuals. As far as Australia versus overseas, I've seen a change in New York, for example. Sort of back about 15 years ago, I'd say it's very safe to walk around New York, and I wouldn't be too worried in any of the commercial areas and so forth. That's definitely changed. London's the same. I think we're very lucky for a lot of reasons, one being an island, that, we get to really essentially choose who comes in to the country. And I'm still, there's areas I wouldn't go to at night, but there's no areas that I would say that I would not go to, which is, I don't think you can say that for the majority of other countries. I think from my experience, again, Switzerland and Austria and places like that, I think, but you're then dealing with a very rule-based community, and you've got to accept the rules when you go there. But why is that? Why is Australia less likely to be a non-violent sort of criminal area? I really think, personally, I think you just got to look at the gun laws. Your criminals always get guns. Don't make any mistake about that. But I think that the culture is very different when the American culture in some states is quite, you wear your gun. People are defined by that. It's just a different culture.
When walking through, say, New York or say Bali or Thailand, Bangkok, how do you carry yourself, Stephen? Like, is it good to have your chest up and walk with confidence so that people won't mess with you, or would that attract too much attention? Is it better to stay low-key and try to blend in? How do you carry yourself?
I think that just blend in, just don't be, out there. But the first thing is understand where you're going to and what you're doing there. And, if you go to Patpong Road and you say you're going to go there at 2:00 in the morning, do you have to? I mean, as a young bloke, I probably would, I've got to, because that's part of the culture. But do you got to? I mean, that's the first step. And the one thing experience I've had is I could tell an Australian for about 400 metres in Central Europe, say in Prague, because I knew what the culture was. I knew, people from Australia walk down the road as if nothing's going to happen. They're very happy. They're very open posture, looking around. They're not defensive at all. And, I could see one and just say, that's definitely an Australian. But if you look at their clothing, got a Quicksilver T-shirt on, they've got thongs on, board shorts, or conversely, they've got R.M. Williams boots, There's things that you pick up in the non-verbal communication that you can just say, I know exactly where they're from. I don't know their house number, but I know that they're, Western Australia, outback, surf culture, you pick up those things.
So the goal would be to dress how that country dresses and
dress appropriately. Yep.
Be more defensive. Don't have this wide-eyed, sort of naive look on you, and sort of. Yeah.
Yep. My advice is, in all those circumstances, walk as if you know where you're going. Even if you don't know, walk directly with purpose, and then go to a shop or something, and work out where you're going and move on. I mean, I used to see the Pickockets on the Charles Bridge in Prague, and I could tell them from a mile away as well, but they could tell me. And I had one of them come up to me and she said, I'm going to get you before you leave Prague. And I said, no, you're not. But I mean, it's that sort of, right?
Crazy. That's a good tip. Walk with direction.
Walk with
purpose, yeah.
Walk with purpose, yeah. And be confident.
Got it. Now, Stephen, what's your biggest tip when it comes to overcoming, growing from trauma? Like, you've probably seen horrendous things. Is there, do you have any tips or any advice? Is there any way to grow from that? Is there any way to turn it into a positive thing?
Well, that's $1 million question. I wish I had the answer. I wish I could put it into a magic wand and sell it. But everyone's got frailties and vulnerabilities. And I went through, a lot of circumstances which were unique and dangerous. And I can tell you one thing is it's community. Because you have something happen that you deal with, doesn't mean you're going to fall over with PTSD the following day. But if you have several events, I think it's fairly predictable now that you're going to have some reaction to that, and you need to seek help. And I'm saying it from someone who went through it, and I refused to get help until it was too late and had to go through a whole lot of work to sort of basically get myself back on track. And I don't think people, the culture I grew up with was, you're a tough guy. It was weakness to seek help. It was weakness to say you had a problem. But I'm saying as an ex-tough guy that it's not weakness. It's actually being smart, because it affects your whole life. It affects your family, affects your friends, affects relationships. And often you can't see it, but they can. And that's what people would say to me, Steve, what's wrong? And I go, nothing's wrong. What are you talking about? And they go, oh, no, you're walking around with your bottom lip on the ground, and you're not seeing the good things in life, and you're drinking too much, those sort of things. And, this becomes a very important part is, even though you're not seeing it, everyone else is seeing it, and then behaves in a different manner. So I think you've got to get early intervention, getting a friend who's actually strong enough to say, you need help. I'm here to help you. What can we do to get you through this? And I think that's an enormous, brave friend that does that.
What's the difference between people who go to war, go through military, go through the police force, versus the sort of adventurers, the explorers? Like I've been recently following this guy named Mike Horn, where he's traveled around the world. He's sailed down the Amazon river. He's crossed the Antarctic. He's shared stories on how he took off his glove and he got frostbite and he had to make a tough decision. He had to chop a part of his finger. How he was caught in a tough situation where he was knelt down with a random person and that person got shot right in front of him, and he luckily did not get shot. And now he's come out really strong with a lot of experience. He's still living life and has this joy about him, and he's still traveling the world and doing crazy things, and he's had a cumulative effect that helped him gain all this experience and build him to be the man he is. How come the opposite seems to be happening with people who go to military? It seems to be a cumulative effect going downwards.
I don't think there's an easy answer to that, but I'll just point out that the reason you're talking about this guy is because he's exceptional. And always people that will be exception to the rule. I'm not talking about, when I talked about, getting a hand, I'm talking about people who go through the experiences but just are vulnerable to it for whatever reason. And I'm putting myself up there, having been trained, not only as a negotiator, but as a tactical person, going into high-risk policing incidents. It is a cumulative effect, and it may not happen right there, but it might happen a year later. So I think that we're dealing with the majority versus the exception in this situation, and I take my hat off to him. And there's been adventurers like that for forever. You have to look at Shackleton and people like that who take on these enormous endeavours. But the reason we notice them is because not everyone's doing it, right?
Because recently, like from the New Caledonia trip I went on, there was a mountain that I went on and I hiked the mountain, and it was supposed to be like a 5-hour return hike. It took 5 hours just to get to one of the peaks, and on the way back, completely got lost. Had no signal, there was no one on the tracks. The tracks were already hard enough, it was like jungle type of sort of setting, and the sun set and I was forced to literally sleep on the floor. It was in a mountain condition, it was cold, I had short sleeves, I hadn't had any food, and it was like 2 days, no food, and I was hiking for 20 hours straight. And I was so scared. In that moment, and there were so many times I just want to give up. But now coming out alive and sort of beating death, I do feel that I've sort of grown from it, and I do have experiences that I can take away from it. But maybe you're right. Maybe something might pop up in a year's time where I do get a bit scared or issues start popping up. But each trip I do seems to get more and more challenging.
I think you're right. I think that the more you do stuff, the more that you extend your risk appetite, right? Because you get experience. Like, I'm sure that if I said to you, we're going on a 6 or 7 hour hike, you're going to ask me, so what are we taking for food? What sort of clothes will we need? What's the overnight temperature? And that's a perfect example of, the experiential risk management sort of thing. And as I said before, I would have actually started by saying, why? Why are we working to the top? How long is it going to take? I would have just done that instinctively. And you say, well, I want the adventure, blah, blah. Well, I can spoil that adventure. So you didn't even reach the top. Did you? Didn't make it.
I didn't make it. Only one of this, I made it to the second peak, and I couldn't find it, or not enough time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it's an enormous amount of planning. But where there's no planning, it's about saying, okay, I accept the risk. I accept that I'm going to get lost. You know, and saying, and then test it. If I ask you, what was the feeling like when you realised that you were lost?
Horrible. I was so scared. I felt hopeless. I was wondering if I was going to make it out alive.
Did you have a physical in your stomach type feeling, you know, cramps and butterflies and all that stuff?
That was probably the feeling where I made it to the second peak and I was like, it's time to turn around. It's 1 p.m. I had that feeling where I was like, a bit of my ego was like, I want to keep going. I've made it this far. But then I was able to get that butterfly feeling that told me, okay, it's time to turn around.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you remember the feeling, that's your body saying, that's where the endorphins are being pumped into your blood. Your brain's going, this is fight or flight, freeze type situation. And it then releases chemicals into your system, you know, endorphins and other stuff. And that then triggers those butterflies and, you know, the stuff you feel. Now, what that is that's the first thing the mind's realising before you actually understand that you're in trouble. And if you notice these, if you can notice these and you can start reacting on it, you know, being able to, okay, I understand that my mind is saying I'm in trouble. What do I do? Like, in a logical way, you know, do I need heat and shelter? You know, obviously food, because you've already spoiled the story with there, had no food, but, you know, is there something I can eat? You know, is there berries, you know, blah, blah, blah. And you start working through this logically. I think this is what the guy you were saying before, what was his name, Michael?
Mike Horn.
Mike, that's it. You know, that's something that I reckon instinctively he's got the ability to understand that and say, okay, what are my options right now? And able to work very quickly through all those options. And that's quite exceptional, you know, not too many people can actually do that. But the more that you do it and the more that you understand, listen to your body, the more likely you are to come out the other end. You know, I do this in training, you know, how do we train negotiators? We create scenarios that are absolutely as close to the real thing and get used to it, how your body is reacting, and be able to work through that and be able to acknowledge it, but work through it. And scenario-based planning for these adventures would be the same. You know, you would practice it. You would say, right, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this. I'm going to take this amount of food because that's what I'm planning for. And you might come back and say, well, I need double the food. You know, I need another layer of clothing. So there's all those things that are operating, and so in negotiation and tactical, all these scenario-based planning and training are done to be able to prepare a person, a body, to be able to deal with these stress situations.
Now, because of this trip, I now know when to turn around, to bring food, check the temperature. If the path gets a bit rough and I'm getting a bit lost, that's a good time to turn around. If I am stuck in the forest and I'm nowhere near out of it, let's start building shelter now that it's 3 p.m. So I learned so much from it because I've sort of did that. Now, if I didn't do that, would I have been able to learn these things? Was that a bad thing to do, or was it a good challenge?
Well, I think any experience you're learning through the process, right? So experiential learning, you know, is a very powerful tool. What I'm saying is that you actually can use isomorphic learning, which is learning through other people's mistakes, to do the same thing without having to put yourself through that stress.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but sometimes you've got to go through it, you know, because knocking down a door to arrest an armed offender, you can do it in practice all the time. But in your mind, it's still practice, right? But let me tell you, when you get to do it in real time, saying, when I kick that door in, I might get shot. That's different, right? So I think that at the end of the day, the experiential, if it's got the right reason, I'm saying, obviously making a decision, I want to go to the top of the mountain because it's important to me. Okay, that's fine. How do you do it? How do you do it safely? And how do you do it and not put other people in danger?
That's smart. So for example, one of the things I've wanted to do was, one of my close friends, basically an older brother, he's done this motorbike trip from North Vietnam all the way down to the south. Now that's something that's still a bit out of my comfort zone. I don't have enough experience to do that, but I eventually want to do that in the next 2 to 3 years. Now, why do I want to do it? I guess the reason why I want to do that, it's because I want to be able to grow and be able to have a challenge like that not be a challenge. I want to be able to gain new skills. I want to be able to gain survival skills so that, I increase, like I'll be tougher with the one life I have. I guess that's the reasons why I want to do it. And then I'd want a cool story as well. What's your thought? Is that just stupid? Should I not do that? Like, should I just stay in Sydney, Australia and just continue working off my laptop?
Well, I've watched I can't remember the actor's name, but riding bikes across east to west and north to south. And, I always think that's an unreal adventure. And would I do it? I'm not terribly comfortable with motorbikes, but I've done 10 Sydney Hobarts.
Wow.
And, that was my Everest, if you like.
Yeah.
I mean, toughest yacht race in the world. And not only did it, but I was a co-skipper on 4 of them.
Wow.
So I think everyone has that little, what's their Everest, what they want to do. Just make sure you're not competing against people. Make sure you do it the right thing, because that competition, you do stretch yourself, of course, and it just might be beyond what you'd planned for or your ability. So anyway, I think it's great. Life without managed risk would be very boring. But life with doing silly risks can be dangerous to other people. Because we tend to rescue people. We tend to try and rescue people. And you go, why are they out on the water with 40-foot waves and 60-knot breezes if they haven't done all the training? Because under the law, if we're the nearest boat, we've got to render assistance. And let me tell you, going near another boat or yacht with 40-foot seas and 60 knots of breeze is dangerous for everybody.
That's a great way to end. I think the whole time, the thing that I was scared of on the mountain was if there were so many times I just wanted to give up. I just had no energy. I just wanted to just sit there and just lie down and it's whatever happens. But just knowing how much pain it will cause to my family members, my mother, that I just couldn't bear. I'm hurting the people around me. And my mum's gonna have to live the next 20, 30 years of her life with this pain and all because I wanted to climb a mountain.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end as well. I think that that idea of the first question is why, right? Why am I doing this yacht race? And I've met some very courageous, tough people that wouldn't get on a yacht. So it's very situational compared to the experience of the person. So I think you've just got to, like everyone, just go through that checklist. I mean, if you got on a plane and the pilot said, well, look, I haven't really flown this plane before and, I think everything's right. I did have a fight with my wife, but what the hell? Let's just get this thing into the air. Would you stay on the plane?
No.
And I think that's the analogy you want to do, is that you would call him a foolish idiot to act like that. So don't be that foolish idiot. Plan.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This has been an amazing chat. Where can people, if people want to reach out and maybe ask some questions, or maybe they might need some consulting help when it comes to risk management, what's the best way for people to maybe just follow your journey or hear from you? So
I'm on steveyork.com.au, and please drop me a line if anyone wants to have a chat. And I'm at that stage of my life where I'm coming to the end of my corporate career and want to still give back, and I think my experience is something that I can help in training and consulting and education. So be very pleased to hear from people.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I really appreciate it. I just love chatting with you. You have such a crazy story. You've done so many things, and you have this sort of you've been through life. Like I can just, it's emanate. You've been through the ups and downs, and you have a lot of experience and wisdom from you, and I could definitely just feel that chatting with you, and I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks very much.
Awesome. So yeah, that's another episode of the podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for your time if you've made it this far, and I'll see you guys next week with another episode. Peace.